So I've always mainly played first-person shooters and multiplayer games, and those have always been my most successful games to stream over on Twitch. I've been wanting to expand my horizons and play other genres of games I normally don't because I'm tired of being a basic bitch normie. The problem is that my audience didn't like that so much. When I play anything other than a multiplayer shooter, my view count tends to drop and the chat activity dies, and since streaming has always been my main focus, that's a big issue. My solution to this is to turn my experiences playing these games and other types of genres into review videos, so that all the time playing them wasn't wasted. This is the first video made within that context, so don't be a piece of shit like you always are, and remember to spank that subscription button like your stepsister when she got stuck in the dryer. And while you're at it, leave a like and start a discussion in the comments below. This engagement tells YouTube to recommend it to more people, so it's a completely free way to help me. The game was recommended to me by longtime follower Insane. Thanks, Insane. The Long Dark is a survival game set in an open world environment and played from a first-person perspective. Perspective. The game takes place in the frigid Canadian wilderness, where the player assumes the role of a crash-landed pilot struggling to survive after a geomagnetic storm decimates the world, or at least the local region. I honestly didn't have high expectations going into the game. It looked dull and boring. I was wrong though, and ended up loving every minute of it. In general, your goal is to progress through the story to try and find your dumbass wife that made it her personal goal to get as far away as possible from you, walking endlessly in the opposite direction while crying about how far she is from you. All while surviving, unless you're just playing survival mode, in which case, just survive without worrying about your dumbass wife. The art and soundtrack for The Long Dark are both moody and bleak, with a small but bright sense of hope that keeps you going. I also remember whenever I wasn't in any immediate danger, when I had food in my belly and a warm fire inside of some random cabin, it was incredibly comfy and almost relaxing because of how hard surviving in this game is. It gives you, the player, a sense of accomplishment and appreciation for actually surviving, considering you start off as a freezing noob barely able to kill rabbits. When times are good, it just felt cozy. We have 4 main stats to keep an eye on: temperature, hunger, thirst, and energy. All pretty self-explanatory, and failure to take care of one can create a domino effect on the others. Your enemies are the weather, terrain, and wildlife. It's always cold unless you're indoors or near a heat source, and the cold has varying degrees of intensity. At best, you can last a long time as long as you're bundled up. At worst, you can literally freeze to death within minutes if you don't find shelter. The weather system is pretty cool too. In other games, the weather tends to change instantly, going from sunshine and rainbows to a torrential downpour, as if Poseidon had a personal vendetta against you. In this game, you can kind of tell when a storm is coming. It gets really quiet, there's less wildlife, and a light fog rolls in, and the music fades out. Soon the wind will pick up, and later that day the wind starts to howl and the snow is so thick you can't see more than a few feet in front of you. And it's so cold, travel is nearly impossible. I've never been as terrified of bad weather or relieved to see good weather as I have in this game. There's dozens of different food and drink items in the game from various sources. They all degrade too, slowly expiring, so even if you hoard them, they won't fill your stomach quite as much as fresh foods, and you can potentially get sick. This mechanic stops the player from hoarding their pile of food at their base like a dragon. You have to constantly find or produce more food and water. Water is easy, you can melt snow until it's purified, but it takes time and fuel to do that. You can also drink tea, soda, and coffee. Tea warms you up and helps you regain energy and less time while sleeping. Coffee warms you up and reduces fatigue, and soda fills your hunger along with your water. Many other food and drinks also give benefits and some afflictions, but you can check out the wiki if you want to know the others. It's important to get sleep when you can in the Long Dark. Being fatigued will negatively affect everything else. You can't carry as much, you're slower, you're more prone to injury, and you're less efficient at completing tasks. But you have to be strategic with when and where you sleep. Your hunger and thirst will continue to drop while you sleep. So if you sleep for too long without supplies, you will wake up starving and thirsty. If you don't have enough fuel for a fire or aren't in a shelter, you can wake up freezing. If you're forced to sleep during the day and have to move at night, it will be much colder and harder to travel. The terrain can also be a problem. Climbing steep hills increases your risk of injury, especially if you're over-encumbered all the time, like me, because I'm a greedy loot whore. There's even frozen lakes you risk falling through the ice and turning into a popsicle, and high mountains that you can fall off of and eat shit when you bounce off the ground like that scene in Midsummer. For wildlife, there are wolves, bears, rabbits, deer, and moose. There's also timber wolves, which are basically just hyper-aggressive wolves on steroids. Moose are basically just deer that like to beat the shit out of you for no reason. The story features a boss bear that always pops up at the most annoying and inconvenient times. There's also fish, but I didn't really fuck with them because I consider fish to be vegetables, and I don't fuck with vegetables. Then there's crows, which most players ignore or hardly notice, but pro tip, pay attention to the crows. They tend to hang out near points of interest, and even start freaking the fuck out and screeching like crackheads whenever a predator is nearby. The most compelling aspect of the game for me is the decision making. It's organic, not forced on you like other games, and your choices have genuine pros and cons. For example, if you are a stupid piece of shit like me that hoards every supply you find, it will bite you in the asshole. Having that stockpile of loot on your back may make you feel safe, but your ankle is more likely to randomly snap like a twig, and you'll get fatigued much faster. But at least you won't die hungry because you shoved 40 frozen airline meals directly up your asshole. If you need a lot of wood, you can break down a big old branch, but that takes time and you get cold while you're sawing that big log down to more manageable pieces. If you want that meat from the wolf you killed after it tried to start shit with you, same thing. It takes time to butcher it, so you have to be selective with how much meat and fur you harvest. If you're traveling a long distance, you can either stop every so often to safely sleep, warm up, and eat, but that means you're going to go through more supplies on the way there, or you can just say, fuck it, and attempt a triathlon through a blizzard and nearly freeze to death to get there, but save more supplies doing so. You can take the longer, flatter, easier to traverse terrain, or become a billy goat and try to climb over a mountain to save time, only to get your ass eaten by rabid wolves. Every decision you make has real, organic, impactful consequences, and they aren't forced press 1 or press 2 QuickTime events. They're real decisions you as the player make without even realizing it, and they drastically change the experience of a playthrough. Another cool thing I liked is that the game forces you to move, even on the straight-up survival mode. You can't craft bases like other survival games, and you can't farm. You can still have a base of sorts. You can find an old cabin or abandoned gas station to hole up in, but you're stuck with the pre-existing resources it has. Loot doesn't respawn, or at least it takes a stupid amount of time to. I don't know, maybe it does, but it took too long for me because I would have starved had I not moved on. What this all means is that if you want to survive, you can't just stay in your house. You will eventually starve or die of thirst. There's even a debuff called cabin fever, where if you spend the majority of 6 days inside a building, you can't sleep. That makes it pretty clear that Hinterland Studios' intention wasn't for the player to just sit inside their base the whole time. Compare that to Subnautica, for example, among other survival games. Once you have a decent base, there's no strategic reason for you to actually leave your base. It's actually safer to stay where you are. Whereas in The Long Dark, even if you're just playing the straight-up survival mode, you have to leave your base or you will eventually die. That doesn't mean being a nomad is easy though, or that by constantly moving, you are automatically safe. It just means that there is never a permanent safe place in The Long Dark where you have infinite access to resources. They will deplete and you have to move on. This fixes my issue with other survival games that get boring because you reach a point of automation that just takes care of itself and you don't have to do anything, and I applaud Hinterland Studios for this achievement. The story is also pretty cool, by the way. Originally, the game launched as a standalone survival experience, but later added in episodic story mode chapters. I like it because it doesn't spoon feed you anything. It's kind of a mystery. It's immersive. In the start, all you know is something bad happened, but you're too busy trying not to die to worry about that. It gives you breadcrumbs along the way, mostly from cryptic, philosophical characters. It's not like other games where it started off in the year blah blah blah, the human race was clapped by a virus that destroyed, or any of that nonsense. Realistically, you are just trying to survive and piece together what happened, and find that dumbass wife of yours. As I mentioned, the game also has a straight-up survival mode with various difficulties, harder afflictions, and even permadeath for those of you that hate yourself. There's also this Escape the Dark Walker or whatever game mode that I just found out while writing the script for this video. I haven't played it, but it sounds terrifying. Basically, some invisible Lovecraftian horror wants to touch your penis, and you spend the whole time running from it. It starts off as slow as a snail, sluggishly but constantly moving straight for you, no matter where you are or how far away you are. You have to collect these diaries or whatever, and once you get them all, you can tell the monster to fuck off. But that gets hard because the more you get, the faster the Dark Walker bitch moves. Eventually, it's literally just full sprinting at you like Usain Bolt or that one SCP that throws a hissy fit whenever you look at it. It's basically just Canadian Slender Man. So the idea isn't very original, but it sounds terrifying. There's a lot of stuff to do in this game and a lot more to talk about, and I highly suggest you play it. Especially if you're a fan of survival games, you're in for a treat and a different experience compared to most other survival games. Being an indie game, it's a bit unpolished, but that's excusable. Also, the soundtrack and opening sequence is some of the best I've heard out of any game I've played. Did ass. One of my favorite moments in this game was probably when I got attacked by a group of rabid wolves and was running out of medical supplies. And I passed out, I woke up, and it was almost nighttime. And I didn't have anything. I was having to tear off my clothes to make bandages, which just made me colder. And eventually what I did was pop an emergency stim right before I died. And with that stim, I was able to find a cave instead of passing out and build a fire. So moments like that are pretty cool. Overall, I'll give this game a 7.5 out of 10 rating. 8 felt too high because I would have liked to seen a bit more wildlife and more interactions with creatures. There's not a lot of them, and the game feels kind of dead, literally. But to be fair, that was probably intentional. But 7 felt too low, and I'm inspired by that one pizza review dude from Barstool Sports, who says it's a mistake to rate something too high, like 9 or 10, because then, once you try something better, you can't really rate it any higher. In my mind, anything above a 7 is a great game. A 9 or a 10 is a perfect game. Anything below 5 is dog shit or just super boring. So yeah, this game isn't perfect, but it isn't dog shit and it's not boring. And it's definitely unique within the survival genre. So 7.5. If you liked the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to check me out live and maybe see my initial reactions to games before I review and make a video on them, check me out at twitch.tv/HYDEUnleashed. Drink your water, get some sleep, stay warm, butcher your rabbits, and stay unleashed.